She tried to gauge the gap between the railings. They weren't actually that close together. Mum was always saying she was skin and bone. Maybe she could squeeze through. She pushed one shoulder between two of the tall poles. She was too fat with the shawl round her neck, so she took it off and took off her coat as well and made a small pile of them on the ground so she could reach through and grab them when she was inside. Ida tried again. The railings were cold and hard. She pushed with her hip. Half of her was through. If she could just push her head through. But her ears were in the way. She twisted her head. The poles pinched one ear into her skull. It was cold, and flakes of paint stuck to her cheek. In turns, Ida was regretting this plan of action and reassuring herself that if she could get through, Bonnie certainly could. A few more twists and pinches, and Ida realised that, of course, there was no way she was going to get through. If that were possible, the children would all have escaped by now, wouldn't they? There had to be another way. She pushed against the two bars either side, squeezed her body out, but her head wouldn't budge. She was stuck. The huge front door opened, and putting on her gloves, Mrs. Buller stepped out. Ida pushed and pulled again, but it felt like she was going to rip her ear off if she pulled any harder. "Ida Barnes, is that you?" Mrs. Buller's voice shrieked across the yard. "Trespassing! It won't be the training school for you, it'll be the Borstal!" Mrs. Buller marched in Ida's direction. Two young men loped after her. One was large and muscular. The other, Ida guessed, was younger, but still a few years too old for school and was a bit weedy. Behind Ida, long fingers gripped her shoulders. Ida flinched, every muscle tensed as the mysterious hand on her shoulder tightened. Had Mrs. Buller sent a third invisible man to get her? "Oh, darling, what have you done?" The voice behind was kind and posh. Ida had never heard that voice before. But the bars held Ida's head so fast she couldn't turn to look. What? Who are you?" "It's me, darling." The lady was speaking as if she knew Ida, but she was not answering Ida's question. Should Ida have recognised her voice? "Thank you, ma'am," she said, just in case. "Play along," whispered the voice in Ida's free ear. Mrs. Buller was close enough for Ida to smell the lavender that didn't quite hide an unpleasant stink of sweat. "Bill, unlock these gates at once!" Bill jangled a large ring of keys and unlocked the gates into the grounds of Netterfield Grange Orphanage. At the same time, a warm, oily liquid ran over Ida's ears. It trickled inside the shawl and down her neck. She knew the smell. Olive oil. Mum used to have a bottle for her hair. Bill pulled the chain. It slithered through the gates. The long fingers on Ida's shoulders gripped tighter. Mrs. Buller strode through the gates with the other young man skulking behind her. With one firm yank, Ida's head popped out from between the bars. She had the peculiar sensation of being born. Ida knew her birds and bees. She checked for her ears, but as she could hear the lady making a fuss of her, she assumed that they were all right. "Oh, darling, what do you think you are doing? Let Aunt Constance look at you." Mrs. Buller slowed down at the sight of Aunt Constance. "I do apologise for my niece, Mrs. Buller. She's a little forward. Of course, we'll be following the correct procedure to collect Bonnie." The feathers decorating her hat waggled as she fussed. She sounded like a lady, and in her fashionable red coat looked like a lady. But when Ida studied her face closely, although it was on the plump side, under rouged cheeks and bright pink lipstick, it was young, perhaps only a few years older than her own. "All better now? We must be going now, Ida, darling. Mrs. Buller is taking good care of dear Bonnie, aren't you, Mrs. B? Toodaloo!" The lady, Aunt Constance, much taller than Ida, but that might be on account of her high heels, steered her efficiently away from Mrs. Buller. The lady walked very quickly. She carried a shopping bag over one arm, which Ida realised was her bag with Mr. Rogers' tools inside. Her heels clack-clacked on the paving stones. Ida had to run to keep up. She snatched a glance back at the narrow-eyed Mrs. Buller in the middle of the pavement, her hands on her hips with the two young men beside her like shop dummies. Was she deciding whether or not to set the dummies on them? "Quick, keep up," said Aunt Constance, heels clacking faster than ever and her arm pushing Ida on until they lost sight of Mrs. Buller and her henchman. "How do you know about Bonnie?" Ida asked the lady, who seemed more and more like a girl, not that different from Ida herself. "Real name, Lady Virginia Constance Maud Frimley Watts, but if you want the truth," she lapsed into a Jimmy Cagney voice, "I ain't no lady. The others call me Gin." "What others?" Gin pushed on a rusty iron gate directly under the railway bridge. "In here." "In where?" Though the gate looked like it hadn't been opened in years, it was surprisingly well oiled. Over the brambles that covered the garden, Ida could see a cottage. "They think this place is haunted," said Gin mischievously. Ida had never seen this place before. No wonder she never came up this end of town and had never been on a train. Not that you'd be able to see the place from the station anyway. Next door, chains rattled through the orphanage gates, boots crunched across the gravel, and a heavy door clunked shut. "Jolly good, they're not coming after us," said Gin. "Are you friends with Baby?" asked Ida, wondering if she was actually being kidnapped rather than rescued. "Hole in one, Ida, old chum. You can say hello back at the Lily. Come on, it'll be getting dark soon. Here, would you like these back?" Gin gave Ida her bag of tools, grabbed Ida's free hand and led her back through the gate. Ida half thought to yank her hand away, but kidnapped or not, she really wanted to know what this girl, who looked neither dirty nor like a hoodlum, knew about Bonnie. And who was Lily? A train thundered across the railway bridge above them. "That's the 4:30 to Southampton," said Gin, who took a firm grip on Ida's hand and pulled her over the road. Gin hitched up a dress and, nothing like a lady at all, scrambled up the bank through the long grass to the station on the other side. "Come on, Ida, darling," called Gin from the top of the bank. Her shape against the darkening sky reminded Ida of pictures she'd seen of mountaineers on Mount Everest. For better or worse, Ida did the same. Gin stepped from the top of the grassy bank and, becoming a lady again, merged into the line of train passengers walking up to the station. She beckoned Ida to do the same. They passed the station ticket office and waiting room on one side, and Noel's laundry on the other. Leaving the passengers far behind, they came to a huge heap of coal conveniently positioned beside the track for refuelling the engines. It made an ominous black mountain against the early evening sky. "We're going through there," whispered Gin, pointing away from the coal and the railway tracks into some bushes that looked so thick Ida couldn't imagine how they'd get through. The damp from the wet grass had seeped up the hem of Ida's mac. Her feet felt squished inside her boots, and Miss Lovelock's mum's shawl dripped at the ends. She was regretting her curiosity. Words like goose, which was how she felt, and wild chase, because she was sure she was on one, ran through her head. "But where are we going?" she asked Gin, the strange lady girl. Gin slipped through a narrow gap between the edge of the coal heap and the foliage that had spread so far it almost blocked the way. "Careful of the brambles," she said. Ida tucked Miss Lovelock's mum's shawl inside her school mac. "But where?" Now, completely out of sight of anyone at the station, Gin reached carefully inside the leaves and branches and pulled on a length of rusty wire. "Here," she said. The tangle of leaves and branches opened like a door onto a dark tunnel. Gin had to bend to go through. "Come on," she said, holding her hand. Ida hesitated. Well, She'd come this far. She had to bend too, not as much, but with her hands tightly in Jin's, Ida followed. The tunnel smelled wholesome, earthy, and felt soft underfoot, comforting in a way. They'd not gone far before it opened into a tiny clearing surrounded by more bushes, thicker than ever, all overgrown with ivy and brambles. In the small patch of sky overhead, an evening star twinkled with an almost full moon. "Ta-da! We're home!" said Jin, and she pulled a small curtain of ivy away triumphantly. In the moonlight, Ida read a broken wooden sign. It said, "The Lily." The Lily ... something. It could have been the lily of the valley, Mum's favourite smell. That would be nice. Beside it, in the tangle of bushes and twigs, ivy and brambles, a door opened into the cosiest secret room Ida had ever seen.